welcome to a show where you will hear about how our liberty is being eroded by the very people that swear an oath to protect it.
Today, the president signed a big new anti-terrorism bill that would expand the government's ability to track down terrorists, but at some cost.
On this show, we will discuss many of the lies that the government that hates us, by the way, we will discuss the lies that the people in positions of power and influence spread every day.
And what is the best way to confuse children? Confuse them about their sexuality, confuse them about their gender, expose them to things that their little brains are not ready for yet. That is how they are confusing children. It is leading to chaos, and Big Daddy government, of course, can be there to pick us all up and take care of us at the end of it.
We will also talk about how current elected leadership at all levels of government has been corrupted by power and control, as well as discuss the types of leadership needed to correct our republic's course.
We the people. It was time to remember that we the people are the government.
Providing assistance for the Ukrainians to defeat the Russians, that's the number one priority for the United States right now.
I am your host, Larry Linton, retired U.S. Navy Command Master Chief and prior Tennessee House of Representatives District 12 candidate, and welcome to the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. Welcome to this week's show, ladies and gentlemen. It has been nearly a week since we witnessed a few significant events here in Sevierville as it relates to the Queer and Severe event at the City Civic Center, which is what led to this week's title, Leadership, Failed Systems. Systems put into place by the citizens to not only protect their communities, such as government and law enforcement, but also systems to protect the souls of citizens, such as the church. The failure of these systems and the leadership in those systems are what ultimately contributed to this drag queen show continuing. On the bright side of this terrible situation is this news. Throughout last week, and even up until around noon on Saturday, the cadre of mentally ill people putting on this show were trying to convince the people of this community that the show was canceled. They were doing this in an effort to reduce the number of people that showed up to protest the event. Of course, their efforts in that area were completely unsuccessful. People capable of critically thinking saw through their subterfuge. Since the mentally ill, which includes most of the people on the left, are incapable of critical thinking, they cannot take other people's ability to engage in critical thinking into account when they're devising their plans, at least on the local and state level. Those commies that are somewhat capable of critical thinking, well, they have all mostly moved to our nation's capital where they are busy working to destroy the people's liberty. Anyway, as I said, their efforts were unsuccessful. They even tried creating multiple fake social media profiles to try and spread their lies on conservative pages and profiles here in the community. Seeing as how they could not convince people that the event was canceled, I ended up joining more than 100 people at the Civic Center to pray for the people putting on the show that are obviously suffering from some form of mental illness, but most especially we all prayed for the children that were forced there by their Transhausen syndrome by proxy parents. In addition to myself and many other members of the community, a few pastors showed up to lead the protesters in prayer. Just a few, though. I could count them on one hand. And at least one of those pastors does not even pastor a church here in Sevier County, but in a neighboring county. He showed up as well to lend their voice and support to the members of this community. Folks, for a point of reference, there are literally hundreds of churches in this county. There are at least 6 within a 5-mile radius of my house in the Boyds Creek area. Yet only a handful of church leaders showed up to protest this drag queen event, where most people know that the sexualization of children often occurs at these types of venues all across the country. The system of organized churches has failed in its primary function to care for the souls of their community, especially the souls of the most innocent. In today's world, it takes a pastor, as well as the people in that pastor's congregation, to demonstrate courage in coming out in public to protest against these events. As evidenced by the absence of many of these church leaders this past Saturday, it seems God's word to his people that they are to be strong and courageous. It is falling on deaf ears in our current culture. We are directed to not fear or be in dread of them, for it is the Lord our God who goes with us. He will not leave us or forsake us. While God may not forsake us, some churches have apparently forsaken God. What does it mean to be strong and courageous? What is courage, actually? Well, courage is defined as mental or moral strength to venture, persevere, and withstand danger, fear, or difficulty. That is quite unlike what we witnessed on Saturday. Just what is it that the church fears? It could be any number of things. Maybe it will be a loss of their tax-exempt status, or maybe it will be a loss of attendance. Whatever the reason for churches not being active in their communities and in this culture war, it is all based on fear, the fear of losing something. That fear of losing something is never considered alongside what these churches will gain once they start taking a stand in the culture wars that are happening all over the country and all over the planet. There is something else that men and women, including pastors and elected officials, must possess, a quality they must possess to come out and publicly protest events like this. It takes discipline. And discipline has many definitions. One of the definitions of discipline is this: training that corrects, molds, or perfects the mental faculties or moral character. When people of all stripes and walks of life fail to protest these types of events that prey on the mentally ill and children, they exhibit a weakness of moral character or a lack of training in their moral character. They are allowing the culture to mold them, vice the other way around. Oh, sure, there's some keyboard warriors, and on both sides of the situation, people that will sit comfortably in their homes decrying or supporting this event. But when the rubber met the road, where were they? There were maybe 20 or so, certainly less than 30, degenerates inside the Civic Center watching or participating in what they called a variety show. Outside of the venue, though, more than 100 members of the community that had the discipline and character necessary to confront the debasing of our culture and the sexualization of children. Again, though, I want to point out the members of our community that were missing from the gathering outside of the venue. We already talked about the scarcity of pastors, but they weren't the only group of people that was noticeably absent. Also absent were any members of the Sevier County Alderman, the city's mayor, members of the county commission, the county mayor, or the two state representatives who represent the citizens of Sevierville and Sevier County in the Tennessee General Assembly. All of them that I corresponded with or talked to, they voice incredulity that the law was not going to be enforced, or that they supported efforts by the citizens to actively protest should the event occur, as it did. They did not show up in solidarity with the community they are supposed to represent. So not only did these elected officials not demonstrate courage and discipline by staying home, they also demonstrated a lack of loyalty to the people that elected them to the offices in which they serve. They lacked loyalty on a couple of fronts. Loyalty to not only God's character and moral law, which serves as the foundation of our nation's founding, but loyalty to the people of the communities they serve. Loyalty is defined as the quality or state or an instance of being loyal, with loyal being defined as unswerving in allegiance. Is it any wonder that our state and our nation is at this point? Our systems of government have failed the citizens. Our churches have failed their congregations. These institutions and the leadership within them, once considered vital to the people to live in freedom, now no longer serve their designed purposes. One other interesting note before I continue that train of thought, and it serves as another example of a failed system. I must tell you that there were members of the Sevierville Police Department on scene that Saturday afternoon. The deputy chief of police came out to address what was at the time a smallish crowd of concerned citizens, but still more than the number of people inside the Civic Center. There were a few things problematic in his talk with us. Glaringly obvious was his statement that he would enforce the law, but wasn't exactly sure what the law said. The law in question being Tennessee's recently passed Adult Entertainment Act, and with the accompanying state's definition of what constitutes harmful to minors. When pressed on the law specifically, he stated that it was printed out and sitting on his desk. That seems like a very professional thing to say, right? Especially right as the event was occurring. I asked him if there were going to be police officers inside the venue watching to ensure that the quote-unquote performers would not be doing their typical sexualized performances with children observing. He stated that, in fact, there would be officers inside the venue, which we'll discuss in a bit, and how I'm thankful for their presence inside the building. I then asked the Deputy Chief of Police, Deputy Chief Sam Hinson, if the police officers would be video recording the performance so that the performances could be viewed by the public. Since he informed us that he and the officers inside would make the judgment call if the performers violated the law. The judgment of law enforcement has been quite suspect over the past few years, don't you think? Well, Deputy Chief Hinson then informed me, and the people standing around me, that the body cameras of the officers would only be turned on in the event the officers inside the venue had to engage with somebody that was breaking the law in their judgment. Makes sense, sort of. I say sort of because the deputy chief's actions just a bit later stood in stark contrast to that statement. You see, a bit later, I observed Deputy Chief Swinson pull out his cell phone to record video of the crowd standing outside the Civic Center. But wait, I thought that video would only be taken if there was a suspected crime in progress, or when law enforcement was engaging with somebody they suspected of committing a crime. That is what he told us all, and yet there he was, recording on video the people protesting the event. It seems that he must have thought there was a crime in progress outside the building, right? I've added the video that he took, along with the other pictures and video I took at the event, to the Rumble or YouTube versions of this episode. His video contains the faces of the people outside protesting, along with the license plates of the vehicles they arrived in. Doesn't that strike you as odd? Especially since the crowd outside were informed that video would only be taken if a crime were in progress. Yet the Deputy Chief of Police is on the front steps of the Civic Center recording a video of the protesters out front. I wonder why. I know that I'm probably on some sort of Fed Boy watch list because of the content I discuss on this program, but I can probably count on my name and vehicle being added to a local watch list because I dared to show up and protest against an event that typically includes the sexualization of children. That led me to sending an open records request to the Sevierville Police Department, asking for any videos recorded that day. At the bottom of that open records request, I made sure to include the statement, "Please include the Deputy Chief of Police's cell phone video." I'm pretty sure they were not expecting me to ask for his personal cell phone video. The response to me was that the Deputy Chief's video was the only one that was recorded that afternoon. Nothing odd about that at all, is there? I also asked the question, along with the open records request, why the preemptive measures taken to keep protesters completely outside of the venue, because, we were not even allowed to use the restroom facilities there. Mind you, the Civic Center is a public place paid for and maintained by our tax dollars. And there was no preemptive measures taken with regards to the drag performance that was about to occur. I mean, standard trend analysis of the two separate groups would lead any sane individual to the conclusion that only one of the groups would most likely break the law. There's not been a history of violent protests in Sevier County by a bunch of church-going community members, but there is a history of drag queens dancing provocatively in front of children. So, why the preemptive measures against the peaceful citizens? We know the why, ladies and gentlemen. Because it is a failed system of law enforcement. The very name law enforcement was not evident this past Saturday. The Adult Entertainment Act prohibits drag queen performances in front of children, and that law was not enforced. Again, it all boils down to fear. Fear of losing some of that tourist money if word gets out that local law enforcement shut down a drag queen show conducted by the local alphabet mafia here in Sevierville. Or fear of actually going to court to defend their actions after a federal judge put a halt to enforcement of the Adult Entertainment Act in Shelby and Blount counties. Oh, by the way, the federal judge that issued a temporary restraining order against the district attorney general in Blount County and stopped him from shutting down the event in Merville, he was the same judge that forced Knox County schools to issue and enforce a mask mandate on the children during the scandemic. Should be painfully obvious where that judge's loyalties lie, right? He sides with tyrannical government. The federal judges in Blount and Shelby counties, they are an example of a failed judicial system. The people of Tennessee, through their elected representatives in the General Assembly, passed the Adult Entertainment Act this year to protect children from drag queen shows that only serve to expose the most innocent among us to sexualization. And they are one of many methods used to groom children. The people of Tennessee spoke loud and clear with the passage of this law. These two federal judges, through enjoining the enforcement of this law, they have engaged in a federal insurrection against the people of Tennessee. They attack the sovereignty of our state and the sovereignty of the citizens of this state. The judicial system has failed Tennesseans at almost every turn. The federal government is completely destroying federalism. First, it was through the 16th Amendment, robbing the citizens of their primary means of exercising freedom. That was quickly followed by the 17th Amendment, destroying how states selected senators to the United States Senate. Now, through many years of federal intrusion into how states conduct business, as well as passing and enforcing laws within their own borders, the misnamed federal government has destroyed federalism. So, the federal system of government is a failed system now as well. We are no longer the United States of America. We are the federal vassal states of America. The system designed by the Founding Fathers no longer exists. What is the next system to fail us, the citizens of what used to be a constitutional republic? Well, your guess is as good as mine. We already know that elections in our country are broken, and they have been so for many years. More and more people are starting to recognize this, but have not been very clear on what that means. Until now, that is. Despite the recent news out of Arizona about how the signature verification process used in their elections was completely unlawful, Little to nothing will be done about that, even though a determination of law has stated that election should be invalidated. But we also have this news from a very prominent Republican. The former governor of Arkansas and prior candidate for the presidency of the United States of America, Mike Huckabee, had something to say about elections earlier this week. He came out and said on his show this past Wednesday, when talking about the election interference that the commies are conducting on behalf of the child sniffer-in-chief with regards to President Trump, and he said, I quote here, "If these tactics end up working to keep Trump from winning or even running in 2024, it is going to be the last American election that will be decided by ballots rather than bullets." End quote. I agree with that sentiment, but it has more than just the garbage the establishment is throwing at Donald Trump behind it. I have often said that if the blatantly obvious and widespread cheating occurs again, the next time the people vote, whether it's for dog catcher, alderman, commissioner, representative, senator, governor, or president, they will be doing it from bell towers and rooftops. Because the voting booth will have completely proven itself to be just another failed system that elected leadership failed to fix. They failed to fix it because it suits their purposes. It keeps them in power. But it isn't just elections that are causing this sentiment. It is everything else that is happening around the country as well. The evidence of failed systems all across the fruited plains. Judges usurping the will of the people. Law enforcement targeting political opponents while simultaneously protecting the commies. The federal government engaged in money laundering overseas with our tax dollars and failing to protect our own borders here at home. Illegal immigrants receiving money, cell phones, and access to the taxpayer-funded social safety nets, while the vast majority of citizens are suffering under the inflation-causing Bidenomics. The fiscal irresponsibility of the federal government is driving up the cost of living all across the country with no plans to rein it in. Government education systems are also usurping the will of the people at the behest of communist teacher unions and the commies in power in Washington, D.C. Government medical tyranny as it relates to masks and vaccines, which they are preparing to go full speed on again. Corporate tyranny taking over institutions of government at all levels, usurping the people's liberty there as well. Co-opting elected officials to side with the big money donors against the wishes of the people that put them into office. Rampant mental illness being forced on the people by a screeching minority of people because it benefits the government to keep the citizens fighting each other instead of focusing on them, the new aristocracy. All of that is enabled by both political parties too. The establishment Republicans do not get a pass in this. They either enabled the failure of these systems or they did nothing to stop it. Also, churches no longer standing in the gap, surrendering the culture war out of fear of losing butts and seats or losing their tax-exempt status. It is no wonder that our country is on the brink of tearing itself apart. The citizens no longer believe that the systems and organizations put into place to protect our freedom have either succumbed to fear or the leadership have sold us all out for their personal benefit. Things are starting to feel, and this is at least to me and some others in the conservative media spectrum, that they are about to reach a crescendo, folks. All of this is coming to a head, and I do not know what the outcome will be. Frankly, it's kind of scary. But it is something to pay attention to moving forward. We all must keep our heads on a swivel. Be prepared wherever you go. But, as I mentioned just a bit ago, there is something of a silver lining with the police presence at the Queer and Severe drag show last Saturday. You know, it turned out to be a very tame event. I was wrong in that I said the drag queens would not be able to restrain themselves once up on stage and performing with children in the audience. Well, I may have been correct in saying that, but we cannot know that now. You see, a few of the scheduled performers dropped out at the last minute. The reason given was that they were scared and feared for their safety. I don't think that was the real reason. I believe the real reason is because of the scrutiny on the event by the community, along with the fact that their disinformation campaign about the event being canceled did not work, coupled with there being a police presence inside the venue. The perverts that knew they would not be able to restrain themselves pulled out of the performance. The local alphabet mafia, though, they recorded the entire show and put it on YouTube. I forced myself to watch it in the event that police officers in attendance made an incorrect judgment call. Let me tell you, folks, that is 2+ hours of my life that I will never get back. First, I have to let you know that there were more quote-unquote performers in the venue than there were audience members. All told, there were less than 30 people inside the auditorium there at the Civic Center, and at least 2/3 of them were on the stage. However, there were at least 6 children in attendance. 1 child in attendance is one too many at these events, but as I said, the performances, that's what you want to call them, weren't sexual in nature. Again, I think that is because of the scrutiny by the community outside and the police presence inside. What these performances were, though, they were a clear demonstration of a complete lack of talent. Even if I were a mind-numb liberal commie, what I saw on their video was almost too painful to watch. If you are my age or older, you may remember the old television show called The Gong Show. That was a variety show where terrible performers were gonged off the stage by the host and the guest hosts. I think the show America's Got Talent is somewhat similar with their loud buzzers and giant X for bad performances. As I was watching these performances, I kept expecting the gong or the buzzer to sound and these people booed off the stage. Besides the sexualization and grooming that most of these shows have in common, I believe there is another reason these performers want an audience of children. Because children are a captive audience. They are forced to sit through an entire show of talentless morons jumping and gyrating on stage or doing some sort of an interpretation of modern dance. I think that was what a couple of their performances were called on this video. Well, you know, the children cannot get up and leave because their mentally ill parents believe that what they are seeing is some form of art. I think I may have dropped a few IQ points after watching the entire show. But as I said, a silver lining in this is that the performers that did not cancel somehow found the restraint and did not perform lewd acts on stage in front of children. A not so silver lining to this will be what happens in the future. Because local elected leaders, local church leaders, law enforcement, all of them did not put a stop to this, along with the insurrectionist federal judges. The alphabet mafia will be emboldened to put more of these shows on in the future, daring the people of the community to put a stop to their sexualization and exploitation of children. If those systems or institutions do not step back up, we must get more of the community involved. Instead of 100 people at the Civic Center, we need 1,000 or more. When the systems and institutions recognize that they can no longer fail us because of our sheer numbers, we might be able to affect some real change and get back to a place where leadership is courageous. All of what I just discussed comes with a big ask, ladies and gentlemen. The ask is this. If you live here in Sevier County, or if you live in Blount County, or even Shelby County, please forward this episode to your local church leaders. Forward it to your elected officials as well. Encourage them to get back on the side of the people. Ask them to be courageous. Ask them to be disciplined in their faith and demonstrate loyalty with the members of their community. Well, that is it for this week. In closing, we have this week's wisdom from God's Word, and today it comes to us from Proverbs 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. What we are witnessing throughout the country are institutions and systems, along with the leadership in them, that despise wisdom and instruction. We are seeing that they have forgotten the wisdom and the fear of the Lord that was instrumental in our nation's founding, leading them to a complete surrender in the culture war, and surrendering in the fight against the creeping tyranny that now comes from the so-called federal government. Until next week, stand in the arena with me. Reveille, it's time to wake up.